So Stefon Diggs this year certainly has been a huge disappointment in fantasy football. 103 receiving yards per game down to 50. That's very notable.
This is a rough pocket of production, and there are a lot of factors to blame.
Look at the release.
There's your separation.
Great route.
Stutter and go. Gets by clean.
That is unbelievable.
Maybe the greatest catch I've ever seen.
Week 16, 8 targets, 5 grabs for 29. It was the 9th consecutive game that he has had fewer than 100 receiving yards. It's a player, Matt, that in Diggs that just turned 30 last month. What is the temperature check right now on Stefon Diggs?
Yeah, it's funny how we talk about, like, I always talk about, like, you got to look at seasons in pockets, right? Especially with just some of these, make this point later with Amari Cooper, like it's important to look at these seasons in pockets and like the end of season numbers can kind of not tell you like the journey of how we took to get there. Because if you look at Diggs from an end of like a full season perspective, you're like, yeah, we're headed into week 10 and he has 1,000 yards and 8 touchdowns and 96 catches. Like, what are we talking about? Like, that's a pretty good year. If you just look at the first 6 weeks of the season, he had 620 yards, 5 touchdowns, 74% catch rate on 66 targets. He's averaging over 10 targets per game, and he was on pace for 1,700 receiving yards. After the first 6 weeks, like Stefon Diggs is on pace for a career season. Then the team kind of goes into the tank a little bit, right? They lose to New England. They lose to Cincinnati. They lose to the damn Broncos. They fire their offensive coordinator. So a lot of chaos in in Buffalo, right? So there's a lot going on there. I think it's funny too. Again, like this is what we do, right? We remember seasons sometimes for how they start, and then we forget how they finish, and then other times we only remember how they finish and not how they started. Because, and I think like just the most recent thing usually is the most pressing thing on our mind. And obviously, like Diggs has 2 more games to change the narrative. He has maybe potentially a bunch of games in the playoffs to change the narrative, right, in terms of how his season ends. Because I do think it's interesting that the last 2 weeks he's played 46 and 60% of the snaps. This is a guy who, for a long stretch, was never leaving the field. So that makes me ask a couple of different questions. Like, one, are we potentially dealing with an unreported injury? I think that's always on my radar when we've got these like weird snap counts where he's rotating in and out of the field with like Trent Sherfield. I went back and charted the game against the Chargers too, and like there's no separation issues, right? There's no real like route running issues. Like there are a couple of missed opportunities. I mean, big downfield routes that if Josh Allen's a little more accurate on some of these throws, we're talking about a very different stat line. Where some of the games against Kansas City, like I think there were a few drops by Diggs. We're definitely talking about a different story here. So like the margin for error is very thin in football, and like 1 to 2 plays can change the entire conversation we're having about a player. Because if you look at like first read target share, any of that stuff from the last 3 games, Diggs is up there. Like Diggs, it's not as if he's not getting opportunity. We're talking about a couple missed opportunities. We're not talking about a player that I think looks, I mean, maybe he's turning 30. Maybe he's sort of in a different stage of his career. But in terms of like route running, getting open, separation, even getting open on like big post routes, I don't see a declining player. So let me put that part of it to bed. What has been the number one thing we've complained about with the Buffalo Bills offense the last few years? Like, okay, it's great. We've got a lot of Stefon Diggs. We've got a lot of Josh Allen. Who else is going to step up? What is their counterpunch? This is a team right now that has a lot of counterpunches. I mean, they have a really good run game. They have other guys like Khalil Shakir. They have other guys like Dalton Kincaid. Maybe not so much right now, but like you see Gabe Davis pops off for a big game. Like this is a team that has a lot of answers right now. And then when they need it, and Josh Allen even pointed this out post game, we go to Stefon Diggs on 3rd down on the final drive of the game, and we end up winning this game because Stefon Diggs is clutch on 3rd down. So there's a lot of things at play here, but I would say the one thing I'd give positively about Buffalo right now is that under Joe Brady, like they've won a lot of games. They've only lost once since they made this offensive coordinator change. That hasn't coincided with Diggs being a big factor in the offense, or at least a big producer in the offense. But it has resulted in other things stepping up, like the run game, like Josh Allen as a rusher.
You take a look at his first 6 games. We're talking about Stefon Diggs. He's averaging 11 targets per game. Then over his last 9, that drops from 11 to 8.8. It's not a huge downturn in volume, but it is notable. He goes from 8.2 receptions to 5.2 receptions. That's a huge downtick. 103 receiving yards per game, down to 50. That's very notable. And the touchdowns too, right? Like he was on a 14 touchdown pace over his first 6 games. Over his last 9 games, he's on a 6 touchdown pace. So again, a significant downturn right there. The snap percentage stuff, I wasn't privy to that, and I always do look at snap counts across the board, but I just never really thought to look at snap counts for Stefon Diggs because, I mean, again, he basically never leaves the field, but to your point, in this Chargers game, he played less than 60% of the snaps. He played as many snaps as Khalil Shakir. Trent Sherfield is playing more snaps than him. Gabe Davis is out there for 85% of the snaps, right? So this is interesting.
Now, the one thing I know about Stefon, and I've talked to him over the years and connected with him over the years, this is a guy that definitely he definitely wants the ball and wants to be productive. That's the case with every wide receiver in the NFL.
Sure.
That's not that isn't a unique thing. Okay. However, he definitely also wants to win. He wants to be part of the team winning. And I think previously he's felt in prior versions of the offense, he would be double covered. And that's another thing too. This is a guy that gets more defensive attention and more cloud coverage and secondary coverage than anybody else in the league. He was at least 1 or 2 each of the last 2 seasons in terms of double covered rate and reception perception. He's a guy that gets a ton of extra defensive attention. And I think he has felt that at times, they would go away from him until the last moment when they need to unlock him, right?
Which is definitely true.
Which is definitely true over the last 2 seasons.
Yeah,
I
for
think
sure.
this
That's true.
And it would result in, a great example is that playoff game where he certainly obviously was not happy after it against Cincinnati Bengals, where they couldn't get anything going. And then at the end, it's we're throwing
just throw it to him.
Yep. We're throwing low percentage balls to Steph Diggs, and he's opened it. We're hoping he can bail us out, even though he's getting double coverage.
Right.
Now, I think obviously that's not been the case this year, because when he has been double covered, when teams are trying to take him away, you have other answers. You've got the run game. You've got James Cook as a pass catcher. You've got these tight ends. You've got Khalil Shakir. That's the thing that with Buffalo right now, it's hard to sit here and be man, what's up with Steph Diggs? Because the offense is working now.
And they're winning.
And they're winning. I obviously I don't know what Steph thinks about that. I don't know where he's at from a mental perspective, if he's most concerned about his stats or let me get the hell out of Buffalo at the end of the season. But I do know this is a guy that desperately wants to win a Super Bowl. And what I know when I watch this team right now is I don't see any drop off in Stefon Diggs' individual play, other than but I am at least got my kind of squint up about the injury potentially, or if there's something going on there. But don't see a lot of drop off in his individual play. But I know for sure this team has a lot of answers beyond Stefon Diggs right now, which bad for Diggs if you wanted to win your fantasy championship this year, but good for the Buffalo Bills offense.